just going to take the shoulder rope and get in at the wall and then walk it up with the wee stern rope. So if you take the shoulder rope till you're ashore, and then I'll throw you the stern rope, yeah?
It's the 24th of March. Skipper Alistair Philp, known as Bally, is bringing his boat into port.
I'll put her in the stern, and then I'm going to knock her out of gear. And we'll just take the momentum.
Kylakin is a small harbour village just over the Skye Bridge from Kyle of Lachalsh. It's a gateway to the thousands of square miles that make up the northwest fishery. Bally typically fishes in the inner sound between Skye and the mainland. But not today.
I need her sort of parallel to the wall. Just let the momentum take her now. There's a type of paint that you put on the bottom of the boat each year, and that stops seaweed and barnacles and things growing on the bottom of the boat. We haven't done it in a lot of months, so the bottom of the boat is covered in growth, we call it, and it slows us down and causes us to burn a lot more fuel. Just take a turn, Docus.
Bally's crewman, Docus Dochan, has been learning the ropes for the last 4 years. Their boat, Nemesis, is crucial to their survival, both physically and financially. Nemesis needs regular maintenance. They use the tide to get the boat high and dry.
Considering that we didn't actually put anti-foul the last time we pressure washed, there's hardly any growth at all. If the whole hull is covered in barnacles, it creates a huge surface area. So it works best when it's smooth, like a surfboard underneath. This is one of the best drying harbours in the area. You can see from the paint marks all the way up the harbour wall. Each boat in the fleet makes a pilgrimage to this harbour once a year to do their own anti-fouling. The biggest concern here is because this is a spring tide, and not only is it a normal spring tide, it's a March Royal, so it's the biggest spring tides of the year until October. If we go too high up the beach, then when the tide goes out and comes back in again, it doesn't come in quite as far. And they call that being neaped. The danger would be that you're literally stuck here till October, or unless a crane comes and takes you out. There's a boat on the slip who did exactly that. He went to the top of the tide yesterday, painted the bottom of his boat, and when the tide came back in, he intended to float it off, but the tide didn't come in as far.
However, as time and tide wait for no man, Bally and Docus need to get a move on. In 6 hours' time, the harbour will flood again.
Between November and March, we've barely got 20 days at sea. And most of them haven't even been very productive. The prawns have been what they call off, which basically means they're hard to catch. So yeah, we're hoping that once we've done the maintenance on the boat, and over the next couple of weeks, hopefully the prawns will come on and we'll be ready for them. That's the plan. I think you missed a bit as well.
Where?
Teasing
You shut up! Don't be scraping your pipes, please.
I'll put the kettle on for you, how about that? And don't say I'm not nice to you.
That's very awfully kind of you.
Almost 20 miles south is the town of Malik. Sitting on the westerly tip of the North Morar Peninsula, it's been a fishing port since the mid-19th century. This harbour is home to the Rebecca Janine. She's the newest boat in the Malik fleet, and very, very good at catching prawns. The Rebecca Janine is a trawler, a much bigger, more powerful fishing boat than the Nemesis.
I've always been proud all my life to be a fisherman. Fishing's a hard life, but it's a good way of life. It's always been a good way of life. It's something you probably have to be born to. There's very few people come into the fishing industry that aren't born in a fishing community.
Robert Summers has been at sea for 30 years. 7 years ago, he built his £1 million state-of-the-art boat.
Stornoway Coast Guard, Stornoway Coast Guard. Here are the new gale warnings. Hebrides, gale force 8, increasing. Severe gale force 9, later.
Winter storms have battered the west coast for months, keeping the fleet in port. It's now spring, and the Rebecca Janine needs to start catching prawns. There's a mortgage on this boat, and wages to pay. The crew are at sea for 4 days at a time, trawling 20 hours a day.
This boat here is the best fishing tool I've ever been at sea in my life. This boat is capable of catching more prawns and it's better at fishing than any boat I've ever been in. And we're catching less prawns now. 15, 20 years ago, in an old boat, in an old engine, with no sensors, no monitors, we caught a lot more prawns than we do now. So there is a decline in the stock. There's a decline in the stock all up and down the Minches. I don't know what's causing it. It's not overfishing. I know it's not overfishing because there's not the boats about to overfish the stock.
But on this trip, there are plenty of prawns heading into the hold. Scottish fishermen target langoustine, a species also known as Dublin Bay prawns or Norway lobsters. They are bigger than most other prawns, have got claws, and are pink when they are caught. Trawled prawns are kept on ice and stored in the hold until they reach port a few days later. Back in Kyleakin, the tide is rising. Nemesis and her new paint job are heading to sea once again.
The general plan is, on the computer my gear's marked in red from the last time I hauled it. We came out of Kyleakin Harbour, through the Sky Bridge here, then we're heading roughly north, past the Isle of Crowlin, which you can see out the window, and then our gear's another half a dozen miles north of Crowlin again. We've got 4 fleets here. That'll take us to nearly lunchtime.
Unlike the Rebecca Janine, Nemesis is a creel boat using baited traps. They fish in different ways, but both are after the same catch: prawns.
So this is 60 creels, and they're all connected together on the same rope with a buoy at each end. This is the mud on the seabed, and this is the top of the sea. We have a buoy and then a large end rope, and then it goes to a single creel, and then there's a joining piece of rope, and then another creel, and a joining piece of rope, and another creel. And this goes along the seabed for several hundred meters until it gets to the far end where there's another riser or end rope and another float. And we have a choice to pick up either float.
The beginning of a haul is always a tense moment. Empty creels mean empty wage packets.
If you don't see a prawn in the first 3 creels, you kind of get an idea of what's going to happen. So that's our first prawn of the day.
It's not a great start, but the few prawns Bally has caught in this haul go into what are known as tubes. Unlike trawled prawns, creel-caught prawns are kept alive for the premium market.
It's like a factory job in some ways, you know, like on a conveyor belt, you get fast. Yeah, probably not even a kilo of prawns came out of there. Not even a tenner's worth, probably a fiver's worth. That was a short fleet, but it's just as well it was a short fleet because it was... Once we've hauled a fleet of creels, we're going to redeploy them. The prawns seem to move around, and there's not much rhyme or reason to it. So we've moved a little bit, only 100 yards or so, and we've moved shallower and harder, and hopefully we'll see an improvement.
Bally really does need to see that improvement. Recently, stormy weather has made it difficult to fish at all. He has bills to pay, the cost of the boat, the fuel, the wages, the bait. It all adds up.
Unless we can catch over £300 worth of prawns in a day, we won't even get £50 wages. Last time we went out, we caught about £100 worth of prawns, and we didn't even pay for the fuel. So we may not get anything for today, but we have to try. The bait gets eaten out of the creels within 10 days or so, and so if we don't put fresh bait in the creels, then there'll be definitely no point in going out next time.
And there's another problem on the horizon. The 1st of April is just days away. For the last 6 months, Bali and the other creelmen have had the Inner Sound to themselves. From April through to early autumn, they'll have to share it with other boats. Trawlers hunting prawns and dredgers hunting scallops. These waters are about to get very crowded. This isn't just a problem in the Inner Sound. All the way up the west coast, there are different rules for different places. But it hasn't always been this way. I'm off to meet a man who's been fishing these waters for over 70 years. Ian MacDonald first put a boat into Gairloch back in 1944, aged just 16. He's witnessed how the fish stocks have changed and has adapted to that change. It's said he was the first man to realise the potential of langoustine that are now so prized throughout the world.
I started myself. I had a dinghy, and I had a couple of old herring nets, and I went out behind the house here, and there was a lot of herring going, so I filled the dinghy 3 days running with herring, rowed it to Gairloch Pier and sold it, and that's how I bought my first boat.
So when you started fishing all those years ago, back in 1944, how abundant were the waters around here?
If you fell out on the sea, you wouldn't sink with the amount of fish that was in it. It was terrific.
And what was in the water then? What kind of fish?
A lot of cod.
Yeah.
Tremendous amount of cod. They came in here in the spring to spawn. I crossed to Stornoway once with a whole load of cod and sold it on the pier in Stornoway. And little bundles, they all bid on it. And then sailed back here. We only did the one trip because the boat wasn't suitable for that sort of runs.
In terms of actually sustaining communities, how important was the sea when you were a young man?
Oh, very, very important. At the end of the season, when the fishing started to go off, there'd be 4 crew in the boats and made heaps of fish, and each one took so many fish home and split them and salted them, that they'd have themselves for the rest of the year.
Over time, catches of fish fell. Ian realised there was something else in the loch that might provide an income. Prawns.
I used to get an awful lot of them in the gill nets. This size of prawn.
Right.
Just a good lobster size. And then I started with the creels. You let all the small ones go anyway, and next year there was prawns there again for you. And eventually the locals started eating them. I had a market in Edinburgh for them. I used to send them down to Edinburgh, but just as tails. We tailed the prawns then, but the tail was that size and that and round. And they were sold in America and Canada as baby lobster tails. That's how the whole thing started.
The creelmen of Gairloch fished undisturbed until the mid-1980s. Up to that point, trawlers were not allowed in inshore waters. They were restricted to fishing more than 3 miles from shore. The Thatcher government changed all that and opened the waters to everyone. Tell me about when the 3-mile limit was lifted. What impact did that have?
That was the stupidest thing they ever did. They had such a bonanza, the trawlers did, and they came into all the inshore grounds and everywhere. Okay, they did awful well for a couple of years, sweeping up everything, but it didn't last. It was a disaster, that. And for years and years, I was able to be left in peace until I started lifting my gear and towing it away and dumping it so that they could trawl. Trawling was a very destructive method of fishing. That's why I went for creels. Leave something for the next generation. That's the way I look at it. Because if you don't, what's the point of being here?
That decision in 1984 set the scene for a conflict that is still being fought today.
Now the inshore waters forecast. General situation. Atlantic weather fronts will become slow moving across the United Kingdom today.
The beginning of April, and it's a free-for-all in the Inner Sound. Creelers and trawlers are now battling for the same catch in the same place. The danger is that as the trawlers tow their nets along the bottom, they can become entangled in fleets of creels.
You can see the trawlers in the distance and you can see the buoys here in the water, which are marking creel fleets. One of the problems is that these trawlers are working only half a mile off the shore, which means that the creels now have to be within half a mile of the shore, or else they're in the way of the trawlers. It just leaves a significantly less area of ground for the creel boats to fish on, such so that the creels then start to trip over each other. And often you're fishing somewhere just because it's safe, not because you want to fish there or because there's prawns there. In some areas, it's literally war.
Bally sets about hauling the last fleet of creels from this lucrative stretch.
I mean, this pot is quite a good one. It's got 1, 2, 3 prawns and a large prawn. If they were all like that, we'd make a living.
It'll be another 6 months before Bally fishes here again. But wherever he hauls, he's selective about what he keeps and what he throws back.
The prawns themselves, the Scot lobsters, the starfish, and almost all the fish that we catch can go back alive. Literally, it swims away again. The only time that's not the case is if the birds manage to get it before it gets away. I mean, technically, these are legally landable, and some fishermen do land them. But for us, we can catch them again later, so it makes far more sense on the smallest grade, which is practically worthless, to return them. So, I mean, that is a legally landable prawn. Personally, I'd like to see the law changed on that. For that smallest grade, I think it's like £5 a kilo, whereas if we wait till it gets large, it's worth £15 a kilo. And it takes far fewer prawns to make a kilo. Not only that, you know, they're not mature for the point of view of reproduction. So a prawn this size will have reproduced. It will have had eggs and spawned new prawns. Whereas the smaller ones may not have yet bred. And it just seems a bit mad to catch and kill them before they've even bred.
Scottish langoustine are luxury items, prized the world over. The vast majority of live prawns go abroad, where the French and Spanish are prepared to pay top dollar for these West Coast delicacies.
Getting home. This blue van, putting his reversing lights on now, that's for us. See, we're catching that many prawns, they thought they'd film it. Okay, cheers.
I'm catching a lift with John Maroney, just one of dozens of van drivers who are the first link in the langoustine logistics chain. We're going coast to coast. Our destination, Dingwall.
So John, how many ports do you actually pick up from?
We've got about 30 boats and probably about maybe 15, 20 places over Skye and Lacalsh.
So it can be a bit complicated to actually make sure you get to all the right places,
Yeah, there's a little bit of logistics going to get everything organised and fit in the timing, fit in the times with the boats.
And do you often have a situation where you're travelling to lots of different ports in a day?
Yeah, we can have some really busy days.
And how do you coordinate between the drivers and the boats?
A lot of phone calls.
2 hours after they've been landed, the prawns make their first stop on their journey to the continent. The langoustine are put into seawater tanks for storage, but this isn't just any seawater.
Not only do the prawns come from the west coast of Scotland, but all the water comes from the west coast as well.
So you've got the Cromarty Firth just out there and you're not using that water?
Yep. For whatever reason, the prawns want west coast water. So we do what the prawns want.
Keep the prawns happy and the customer will be happy, right?
Exactly.
Once the prawns have had an overnight soaking, preparations begin for their onward journey. Managing Director Ben Murray talks me through the process.
What's happening here, Dougie, is once the prawns have been taken out of the storage tank, we open up the fisherman's tube, and we're doing two things. We're checking the quality of the product, and we're also making sure that the grading is accurate for the end customer. We take them out of the tubes and repack them into polystyrene boxes with cardboard tubes again. And again, that's to protect the product so they don't fight with each other.
Sure. And it's important they go to the customer live, right?
That's the whole idea behind the live sort of shellfish sector, is that that's the barometer of high quality product. It's arriving live at the chef's kitchen.
So where are your markets? Where are they going to go to from this point?
France is our single biggest market, about 50%. Spain about 20%, and in the UK about the other 30%.
So when people are eating in the best restaurants in Paris and thinking that the prawns or langoustine come from the Mediterranean, potentially they're Scottish?
That's correct, yeah.
Is that a frustration for you? Would you like to encourage more people in this country to eat them?
I would like to encourage more people in the UK in general to eat them. There's still a market, I believe, in the UK that people could consume the Scottish langoustine rather than sending it abroad.
These langoustine will be on a dinner plate on the continent within 36 hours. But my langoustine lunch is a bit closer to home.
For those of us who do want to eat langoustine, they can be found if you know where to look, not just the most expensive restaurants. I'm told this pub here has some of the freshest sea-to-plate seafood anywhere in the country.
I've arranged a lunch here at the Plockton Inn. It's owned and run by former fisherman Kenny Golan. Also joining us is Creelman Bally.
Now, Kenny, why did you give up being a fisherman and become an owner of a restaurant?
Too old for fishermen, too tired. I thought there's probably more money in selling prawns rather than catching them.
Really? As simple as that?
Yeah.
And what about yourself here now, Bally? You're obviously loving this. You've spent your time catching these things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really enjoying this because I don't have to pay for them. Pure caught prawns catch at a premium price. And so, you know, when you catch them and sell them, often it breaks your heart then having to go and pay for them again. So this is good for me. I mean, we don't eat enough of these things in our own country, especially creel caught prawns. They're far more expensive than trawl caught prawns. And in other countries, they love to queue up all day and they pay fantastic sums of money for these. So it's good to see that they are still eaten locally. But we could do with a lot more of it. It would make our industry far more sustainable if more people in Britain ate seafood, especially if they ate premium, sustainably caught seafood.
Kenny, do you ever worry in the future because of the amount of creels in the water perhaps and the trawling that's going on that maybe out there won't be enough in 10, 15, 20, 30 years' time?
Well, firstly, in 30 years' time, if I'm worried about that, I'll be...
Whoever you leave the business to.
Yeah. But no, I think we've been talking about this for 40 years now, that prawns are going to run out. People telling us prawns are going to run out, and they're not.
Not everyone shares Kenny's optimism. And for the scores of villages and towns on the west coast, a sustainable fishing industry is crucial to prevent them from becoming nothing more than tourist towns. But in some places, it's already happening. Fishing alone just isn't enough to survive.
I think if I went to see a bank manager and asked him to borrow all the money I needed to buy a boat and a license and all the gear to go with it, and then told him how much I'd actually expect to make in a year. I don't think he would lend me the money someday.
On Dry Island on the edge of Gairloch, Ian McWhinney is the 6th generation of fishermen in his family. He still creels for crabs, prawns and lobsters, but to make ends meet, he's had to diversify into holiday cottages and shellfish safaris.
We want to see what's coming up, Angus? So this is a crab creel here. Yeah, that's called a parlour creel.
Today, Ian has his first safari customers of the season.
This is called the kitchen here. This is where you have the bait. So the idea is anything wandering one of these eyes here, on either side, has something to eat in here in the kitchen, and then leaves into the parlour here. So this is the parlour bit where everything gets trapped until we come along to lift it. And this is what we're trying to catch here, yeah? This is a nice cock crab here. Yeah. So what we do with this is when we catch them, I'll make it safe here first. When we catch them, we have to cut their claws like this, yeah? This so they can't fight with each other, yeah? We're going to pop it in there like that.
On Dry Island, Ian is running a lifestyle business based on his heritage. Elsewhere, fishing happens on an industrial scale. Malik, the night of the 7th of April. Another player is about to enter the fray. The scallop dredger Vikingborg is one of the oldest boats in the fleet. She steams through the night towards the island of Egg. At first light, the crew are summoned on deck by experienced skipper Bill Simmons.
There's many different ways we can set up these dredges for different styles of fishing, different types of ground. There's a tension in the spring. You can slacken this off, tighten it up, put tension on it, take tension off it. This drags along the bottom, and this works backwards and forwards. It should filter a lot of stones out of the way. So we'll leave the stones on the seabed, well, as much as we can. And the clams should just flick into the bag. They should just be flicked up into here and then down into the back of it.
It's not just creelers and trawlers that come into conflict over prawns. Scallop dredgers can also have an impact. Both prawns and scallops live on the seabed, albeit on slightly different ground. Even as far out as the small isles where Bill is today, there's a potential for trouble.
Mobile gear is in direct conflict with static gear. There's a lot of creels being towed away, and there's a lot of people not happy about it. Albeit some of us get on very, very well. We can cooperate with each other.
Bill has decades of experience in these waters, but there's always new fishing grounds to explore.
I'm just marking out some ground. This is the first time I've ever shot here. I'm going to take the gamble and try it. If I'm not catching, the crew aren't getting paid. 8 at the winch, 7 in the water. Well, 8 at the winch, 7 in the water is the offset for the gear, the 2 sets of gear. We'll have 80 fathom of wire at one point and 75 in the other. We always work a 5 fathom difference in the gear. If not, it jumps on top of itself. If we don't watch what we're doing, the gear will hit the propeller and bend the blades. So I rely on my crew being vigilant and keeping the gear away from the propeller.
This industrial method of fishing for scallops is often criticised as unsustainable and detrimental to the seabed. This footage of a working dredge was filmed more than 10 years ago by researchers at Plymouth University. It's not the Viking Borg's dredge. Dredging is a controversial method of fishing, and for that reason, some restaurants won't serve scallops caught in this way. They will only buy scallops that have been hand-picked by divers. Back on the Viking Borg, Bill evaluates the catch from the newly dredged stretch.
Well, it's mediocre. No, it's not something I want to concentrate on. So you can see our bycatch is minimal. It's just 2 or 3 starfish, and the rest is stones, some clams. So, you know, we're really not doing that much damage to the seabed, as some people might make out. Anyway. My father and brother are scallop divers, and we do have that joking love-hate about us. You know, they don't favour scallop dredgers because we take away their clams, but we do try and give them the space.
As well as sharing the seabed, Bill feels he puts a lot into the local economy.
Maybe spend 30,000 a year on fuel, 10, 15,000 on food. I'm constantly repairing this vessel. Last year I put a new engine and gearbox into it. You know, it was 40,000 it cost me. This year I'm putting a hydraulic crane onto it, that's another 15,000. My winch there was 20,000. This is all money that's gone back into the economy, into the local businesses, you know. So we do a lot. I feel I do anyway.
A week later, and the misty waters south of the Misty Isle are busy. The Rebecca Janine is an inshore trawler, built specifically for these waters. But at over 15 metres long, there are places she's not allowed to go. She's too big to fish the inner sound east of Skye, so mainly trawls to the south and the west. She does this with what's known as a twin rig.
Twin rig is basically, it's a 2-net system. We work 2 smaller nets, so you tend to take less fish the way they're rigged and more prawns than you will with 1 net.
As the nets are shot, they sink to the seabed, where they are towed for 4 hours along soft, muddy ground, the favoured habitat of langoustine. But wherever he's trawling, Robert has to be vigilant for creels. Not easy, as the only signs are the small buoys at either end.
It's not as bad as it was. For a few years, it was really bad. There was a lot of creelers came in the go. There was that much creelers on the ground about here. I mean, they were fighting with each other for the ground, never mind with the trawler. You get creelers, they know how to keep their gear out of my way. I know how to keep out of their way. We work the same areas all the time. I know where to expect to see creels. I know where to expect to not see creels. But you get creelers that are just shooting them in the wrong place, trying to close off the area to get it to themselves, which causes a huge rift. Now, we stop fishing as soon as we catch creels, so we're losing money as soon as we catch creels. I could lose 2 or 3 hours fishing time, which is hundreds of pounds to me and my crew. If we catch creels, we'll haul them up. I won't spend 2 or 3 hours clearing them. It's too much of a cost to me. I'll cut that creels away. If I'm at fault, I would pay for them. But how you define fault? If a creeler has shot creels, in my way intentionally to stop me working, then I will not pay anything for them. This is breakfast day at lunchtime, because the crew needed their sleep. Working time directive aboard here, I have to sleep 14 hours a day. I better not say on TV that this is women's work, my wife wouldn't take that very well.
Robert's good mood doesn't last long.
Oh dear. It's snapped it. I will have to haul arse for tit to get to the middle. 75 fathom in the middle wire line on the bottom.
The gear has just snagged and snapped the middle of 3 hauling cables.
What is that? It's broken. Snapped. Yeah. There's quite a weight on there then.
Well, that wire was getting dumped, and we knew it was getting worn, but we thought it would last no bother for another day. Whoa! But no, if it's not going to get hit, just take it up. It's all right, hold on, I'll get it with a block. That's dug in, eh? That's what's caused it.
With only 2 cables, Robert has to use the boat's winch to help bring in the gear, including the roller clump and sensor, worth £13,000.
It's shaped in margin. Sunk in, eh? Come on, Gilbert, you're not even trying. It's only 3/4 of a ton. Where's the sensor, Agent? Is the sensor on the outside?
With the sensor safely on board, Robert's crew continue recovering the gear. The 15th of April, back in the Inner Sound. The sea may be calm, but just 2 weeks into the trawling season, tensions are rising.
So the fleet that got towed is that white buoy and that yellow buoy. But it used to be that the white buoy was 100 yards this way and the yellow buoy was 500 yards to the north again. So the fleet's been dragged, you know, half a kilometre.
It's a creeler's worst nightmare. Bally's discovered that one of his fleets has been towed.
We know that there's a good chance we've lost the shot, which, you know, over time accumulates, and we're going to lose the time that we have to spend recovering this fleet. And if the rope's too badly damaged, I'll have to replace the rope. So, you know, it's already cost us, you know, possibly hundreds of pounds. And if there's too many keels gone, then, you know, it's potentially thousands of pounds. We'll find out in a minute how that pans out. Just watch out for slack rope coming off this, because it's quite shallow. If we're unlucky, then we only get part of the fleet back. Depends, I don't know how many pieces it's in. Oh, here we go. It's happening now. So yeah, that's a physically ruined keel. It's never going to catch prawns again, that one. Sometimes accidents happen, and normally it's in bad weather when visibility is poor, and then it's hard to blame the trawler. But this happened in good visibility to a boat who'd been fishing next to the gear for several days. So he knew fine well the gear was here. And sometimes it happens just because they're pushing their luck and they want to fish where you're fishing. But, you know, this time, the boy I spoke to on the radio said to me that they dragged it out of the way because it was in their way. And what that means is they wanted to fish where I was fishing. So they just chose to drag my gear out of the way, and they openly admitted it. You know, there's no recourse for this sort of thing. There's never been a conviction for gear conflict or gear vandalism in 30 years since the 3 mile limit was opened. So, you know, they can tow our gear with impunity. The only thing stopping them towing our gear is fear that we might do something personally about it, but there's certainly nothing we can do about it in the law. I mean, obviously, if we hadn't handed them back to me, I'd have requested he compensate me, which he's under no obligation to do, but he might have got a broken nose had he said no. We're doing pretty well so far, though. That's nearly half the fleet up.
Losing a day's work and over £1,000 worth of fishing gear is becoming all too common for Bali. It's a source of huge frustration.
I think if you were starting from scratch and there was no fishing vessels, no fishing fleet, no people to get made unemployed, you would never do it the way it's done now. You would have small, locally owned fleets working out of communities which had rights to certain areas of the seabed, and they'd be responsible for managing that, and they would be answerable to their local communities, who could find other ways to harvest that resource if the fishermen didn't manage it properly. But as it stands, we've inherited a system that was once based on a free-for-all. We've inherited a system that's traditionally been very, very badly managed by governments, where governments have allowed over-exploitation to take place. And we've inherited a system where, when we go to try and fix it, we put people out of work from very small, fragile communities. And nobody wants to do that. I think there are solutions, but they're not easy. It's not straightforward. It's never as simple as people first assume.
But there is a place where a solution may have been found. Just under 300 miles northeast, Shetland fishermen have taken control of their own destiny.
Shetland's inshore fishermen have been given devolved powers by the Scottish Government to manage and police their own waters, and I've come here to see how it works.
In the 1990s, the inshore waters around Shetland had little management, with no quotas, no restrictions on types of fishing gear, and no limit on days at sea.
The harbour looks pretty busy along here. Is this normal?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there are always boats in, and there's some of them at sea as well. So.
Ian Walterson, chairman of the Shetland Shellfish Management Organisation, explains the catalyst for change.
Well, the fishermen themselves, they recognised with an ever-increasing fleet of large shellfish vessels, especially in other areas of the UK, both large scallopers and large vivier crabbers being built almost every week. They were recognition that those big vessels had potential to move further from their home ports, their home grounds, and come up to places like Shetland. And if that happened, there was certainly a risk of the stocks being overexploited.
So what did you actually do?
People decided to apply for a regulating order to give Shetland control of its own shellfish stocks from the shoreline out to 6 miles.
And do you think that something like this, that seems to be working here and working well in Shetland, is something that could and potentially should be rolled out around the rest of the country?
Probably works better here because Shetland is geographically isolated. Other areas where they have their one area neighbouring with the next area, it could be more problematic, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good example of local management of a fishery, and that does have potential for other areas, certainly.
I'm on my way from Lerwick to Colliforth on the northwest coast to spend the day with skipper Richard Grains of the Valentia. Hi Richard, how you doing?
Not too bad.
Good stuff. Now come on board.
Yeah, welcome aboard.
Nice to see you.
Richard operates the Valentia on his own. It's a small 9.5 metre boat, but ideal for his type of fishing.
This is very impressive, this. Is this all for single operation?
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Right, yeah.
Richard is a creel fisherman, targeting crabs and lobsters. Prawns are not as common here as on the west coast. Today, we're hauling on the fringes of the North Atlantic.
So how much are you selling a box of crap like that for? If that's full, how much would you sell that for?
We hopefully get about £40 for it.
40 for the full. The fact these waters are managed here in Shetland, what does that mean in terms of what you can actually catch?
Their creel numbers in now, and you're only allowed the maximum of 600 creels. Well, it's just kind of restricts you getting too big, or and you can only work, as I said before, you can only work 600 creels per boat. So I mean, if that's only really enough to sustain one man, maybe two.
How difficult is it to get a licence and to keep it?
No, it's quite a difficult thing to get, yeah. There's stock assessments every year, and if they're not looking as good as they were the previous year, then they reconsider maybe dishing out licences, but yeah, it's quite hard to get into, yeah.
Some of the older guys, have they said that the management of these waters have improved stocks?
Like I said, the past few years has been exceptionally good lobster fishing, and no, sometimes when you're speaking to any older guys, then you tell them what they're hiding, they think that it's pretty good. They reckon that it's far more as they would have hidden in their day, they think. But
is that right?
Sometimes they say that, yeah.
Sure. Cheers, man. Thank you.
The system seems to be working well in Shetland, but back on the west coast, there's trouble for Bill.
Something wrong. Why I may have snapped, I don't know.
It's the 21st of April, and the scallop dredger Vikingborg is just off the Isle of Muck.
Has it snapped? Just take it slowly. I might need to mark this. Just take it slowly. Part of the wire.
So you think you just got snagged?
The gear's just snagged. I told you that bit of ground belonged to Satan. 1 minute we're doing quite well. Now my fishing gear's lying in the bottom. I don't know if I'm going to get it back now. Yeah, it sucks. It's going to be a challenge, this. So I'm going to put out a creeper, and we're going to try and get my gear back. There's a lot of money's worth lying down there. It's a big loss to me if I don't get it back.
With £5,000 of gear sitting on the seabed, Bill needs to hook it with the creeper.
Well, these hooks should snag any loose bit of gear that's down there. You know, there's all these spikes. Will hopefully hook it in. There's plenty down there in the gear for this to snag on, but I've just got to get it on the gear, you know. And let's just hope it's not too embedded in. If it's impaled into the ground, I'm going to struggle to get it back out, you know. Lots of fishing time, lots of earnings, lots of fishing gear. Let's see how good I am. Now we've got it. Oh, there she comes. Oh, look at that, eh? Look at that. Oh! That's not bad, eh? You couldn't catch that any better. That's what 25 years worth of experience does for you. Am I good or am I good? Not only do I catch it first time, I catch it the right way up.
See, there's been carnage here and then just run away.
Maybe, yeah, maybe there's too much stuff in the bottom already. It's a shame it's not so clear.
Back in Kylaken, Bally's passing on his experience to Lachlan, his 10-year-old son.
Bet you'll catch one.
If I catch one, I'll be catching more than you.
Yes. If you catch 3, it's a free ice cream. And if you catch 4, you've got my job.
It's a good offer, but Lachlan is sceptical.
If I get the chance to be a rocket scientist, I'm gonna be a rocket scientist, not a fisherman. But otherwise, if I can't find anything else, I'm just gonna be a fisherman.
Yeah, I didn't really spend any time at sea when I was young. So with mine, I'm hoping by the time he leaves school, he's got a pretty good idea what the job's all about. Stop, stop, quick, get him in. Yes. Woohoo!
Off he goes.
Come on.
Ah, he's running away.
Be quick, whatever you do.
That's it, you've got him. Well done.
A lot of kids around here don't have anything to do when they leave school. There's very, very few sources of employment in the Highlands. So, yeah, for the few jobs that they can do, it helps if they've got a bit of background, a bit of experience. One more for that ice cream, so I hope you've not... Have you given up?
No.
No? All right. When was the last time you checked that line?
A few minutes ago.
"30 years and I'm still the YTS in the camp."
Over in Malig, it's back to basics for Robert. He's torn his nets and now has to fix them.
Perils of getting your net stuck in the ground means you lose fishing time. Hundreds of pounds lost in a tow, £1,000 for netting. It's just the risk and reward. You take the risk, you either get the reward or you don't. Sometimes this is what happens, it's just part of life.
But as it's a Friday, Robert's given his crew some downtime.
Oh, as I says to him, I'll get you a bottle of whiskey.
They spend the afternoon relaxing in the pub. But there is much more than a game of pool at stake for the crew of the Rebecca Janine. Their very existence could be under threat. There is a radical proposal to stop Robert fishing anywhere near the coast. A report prepared for the Scottish Government has recommended the reinstatement of the ban on trawling within 3 miles of land. This ban was lifted in the mid-1980s. It's just a proposal, but it's got trawlermen extremely worried.
I've been a fisherman for 30 years. I've never seen fish in here. I've never had it explained to me why we would need to bring in the 1 to 3 mile rule if it's to allow fish to return to the grounds. We're doing everything we can to try and stop catching fish. Anyone that can see what we come aboard the boat can see that we don't catch any fish. We've never caught any fish in here. I've been told it's to help the creelers. Well, I don't understand why the creelers need help. The creelers are the only unregulated fishery left in Scotland. I've got days at sea, I've got a monitoring system that I have to pay for, I've got square mesh panels fitted in, I'm only allowed to go to sea so many days, I've got a quota that I've had to buy to enable me to catch. The creelers are totally unregulated, they work a tiny mesh in their creels. They can go to sea 24/7, they can work as much gear as they want, they can work anywhere they want. So they'll be shutting down a whole way of life from an inshore sector to benefit who, I don't know. So it enrages me that somebody's wanting to stop me. I built this boat specifically to work in this area. This is £1 million investment to me and my family, and I would love for somebody to give me a valid reason why I should stop working here.
It's not just prawn trawlers that would be banned from inshore waters.
So that would end my fishing career. Period. I'll be finished as a fisherman if they bring in a 1 to 3 mile limit. No doubt about that. On this style of dredging that we do, we rely being close to shorelines, close to islands for shelter, to get away from the swell and the poor weather. If you take that away from me, it's going to put me in harm's way and put me further out and jeopardise me, my boat and my crew, and I don't want to do that. I've never had to do it, I don't want to do it, it's just an unsafe, hazardous environment out in unprotected waters.
The campaign to have the 3-mile limit reinstated is being led, not surprisingly, by the creel fishermen, who have most to gain. Bali is one of the most vocal campaigners.
You weren't allowed to drag gear across the seabed within 3 miles of land over 100 years ago. That persisted for nearly 100 years until 1984, when, shockingly, the government of the time removed the 3-mile limit. Since the 3-mile limit was removed, almost every single commercial species of fish within 3 miles of land has been brought to what you would call commercial extinction. Certainly nobody in the creel industry wants to put anybody in the trawl industry out of work. It'd be interesting if we could find a way that everybody could be accommodated, but the reality is that what we're doing now is unsustainable, and we have to figure out how to get from where we are now to something that is sustainable. We have to find a way of getting there that puts the least amount of people out of work, that facilitates that transition period.
The Scottish Government says the recent report on the reintroduction of a 3-mile limit has been carefully considered. However, they currently have no plans to reintroduce a blanket restriction on the use of mobile fishing gear around Scotland.
On a day like today, it's hard to imagine that these waters could be so turbulent, both literally and metaphorically. You know, I used to have a fairly simplistic view that small was good and big was bad. But now I can see it's a much more complex picture, and I really don't envy those that have to make decisions about the future of this industry that has survived for centuries.
Since we filmed, Bill's not had the best of times. Catches are down, and so is his income. Robert's enjoying a boom, but the abundance of prawns has attracted trawlers from all over the country. And last month, Bali had another fleet of 30 creels towed away. He didn't get any of them back. But he's now hauling lots of prawns and making decent money